Welcome to Justice in Two Languages.
Welcome back to Justice in Two Languages with attorney David Elias Idinopulos, founder of Elias Law in Albuquerque, New Mexico. David is a bilingual personal injury attorney who works closely with New Mexicans facing injuries that can suddenly turn their lives upside down, and he's seen how missing even one important deadline can affect everything that follows. I'm Shameika Rhymes, and today we're talking about injury deadlines in New Mexico. David is here, and he's going to explain what they are, why they matter, and why waiting too long can shut down a case before it ever gets started. Welcome back, David.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, David, most people aren't even thinking about legal deadlines in the days after a crash. What are the most important timelines in New Mexico?
It depends on the type of case and it depends on the person who caused your accident. For example, if it's a private individual, a private company, then generally speaking, the statute of limitations, in other words, the time in which you have to file a lawsuit, is going to be 3 years. Now, I don't want people to take that advice, what I've just said, and think to themselves, oh, I've got 3 years, so I don't need to do anything, because obviously if you wait right up until the deadline and then you go see an attorney, and an attorney may say, did you preserve evidence? Did you take photos? Did you get treatment? There's a host of pieces of advice that we would give to clients, and we would like to give that advice as soon as we possibly can. So generally speaking, the time in which to file a lawsuit against a private individual, a private company, is going to be 3 years from the date of the accident. But for God's sakes, don't wait up until that deadline to go seek the advice of an attorney, because by then the horses may be out of the barn. Now, if you are injured by a government official, so for example, a city, state, county employee, or the police department or somebody like that, then generally speaking, the time limit for that is going to be 2 years in which to file a lawsuit from the date of the incident. However, there is something in New Mexico called the New Mexico Tort Claims Act. Not torque with a K, but tort with 2 T's, one on the beginning and one on the end. And the New Mexico Tort Claims Act, in general, requires you to put that government entity on notice of your intent to file a lawsuit within 90 days of the occurrence. And if you don't put that government entity on notice within 90 days of the occurrence, then you have lost the right to file suit in general against that government entity. Now, if you can still identify the individual government actor who committed that tort, that accident, that wrong against you, you can still sue him or her. But say, for example, you get rear-ended by a police officer in the city of Albuquerque and you fail to put the city of Albuquerque on notice, you have lost the right to sue the city of Albuquerque. You still retain the right to sue that individual police officer.
Wow. Well, some deadlines are short, as you mentioned, and then others stretch out for years. But from what you've seen, how do these different timelines affect the way that a case begins?
Going back to the New Mexico Tort Claims Act, let's say let's say you're driving down the road and there is a massive hole. And you go in that hole, it causes an accident, you sustain injuries, maybe it's a sinkhole or something like that. You will not be able to identify the individual employee that might have been responsible for creating that hole, or might have been responsible for making sure that that hole was fixed. So if you don't put the city of Albuquerque or whoever was responsible for that duty on notice within 90 days, and you cannot identify the one individual who might have had the responsibility for that, then essentially what you have done is you've lost the right to sue. Different scenario. You get rear-ended by an Albuquerque police officer. You don't file that tort claim notice within 90 days of the date of the event, but there is a police report which names the officer that rear-ended you. You can sue that officer. But you have to act quickly. These deadlines are real. And the truth of the matter is, when you are suing a municipality, when you are suing the state of New Mexico or the county, judges are employees of these municipalities themselves. And for a variety of different reasons, I think judges sort of lean towards dismissing a case where they have an opportunity to dismiss a case, especially if you have missed the tort claims deadline.
Well, can you share an anonymous situation that shows how timing, like filing, treatment, or reporting, ended up changing the direction of a case?
Yeah, sure. We had a situation. A client came to us, and it was exactly that scenario. They were driving down the road. There was a massive, massive pothole, and they came to us. They'd seen a couple of other lawyers. The pothole was just huge. We immediately filed a tort claim notice, preserved our right to bring a claim against the city of Albuquerque, eventually filed a lawsuit against the city of Albuquerque, and eventually settled that case. But the client was under the impression, hey, I did a little research. I know I've got 2 years from the date of the accident in which to file a lawsuit. Had not researched what the tort claims notice, the Tort Claims Act required. If the client had just sort of operated on the basis of what he had gleaned off of the internet and had come to us 91 days later after the accident, he would have been out of luck. But because he came to us, my recollection is roughly 50 days after the incident. He had been getting treatment for a torn rotator cuff. We were able to preserve that statute, name the city of Albuquerque, and ultimately settled it we got a nice result for him.
Well, when someone waits too long to get medical care, what kinds of problems start to show up later in the claim?
If you wait too long to get medical care, what you do is you create a defense for the insurance company. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen it at trial where a defense attorney will stand up in front of a jury during closing arguments and say, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, don't you think that if our negligence had caused this injury, the plaintiff would have gotten treatment a lot sooner? The fact that the plaintiff waited so long to get treatment tells you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that he wasn't particularly injured in this accident. He may have an injury. We didn't cause it because he waited too long." I can't tell you how important it is to get treatment and get seen by a doctor immediately. And typically what happens is, people are people, right? They go about living their lives. You've probably got aches and pains right now. I've got aches and pains right now. We don't complain about it. But when you get into an accident, if you don't complain about it immediately and start documenting what has happened to your body, the defense is going to punish you down the road. You see this happen a lot with rotator cuff injuries. You see it happen a lot with meniscus, in other words, the cartilage in the knee, sometimes back injuries, because people, contrary to what the insurance industry wants to tell you, people are basically good people. People are pretty stoic. The average working man or woman knows what it's like to live with pain and go about their daily business and do their jobs. And so they say, well, it'll go away in a week or two and I'll be fine. And they don't document those injuries. They don't go see a doctor. And then later on, when they find out that there is a real injury, the insurance industry punishes them for it.
Well, so when you say go immediately, like what does that time frame look like? Because would it be go that day, or would you say between 1 to 4 or 5 days?
Yeah, I would like to see clients, particularly in the case of a bad accident, I would like to see the clients go to the emergency room. And the reason for this is if you don't get treatment, the insurance company is not going to consider that treatment that you didn't get in their evaluation of your claim. You get involved in a bad accident where your vehicle is totaled. Anybody on a jury is going to recognize that a person who gets in such an accident, who reports pain at the scene of the accident, has a reason to go to the emergency room, has a reason to get into an ambulance. And those add up to two things. They add up to bills and they add up to treatment. And insurance companies pay money for bills and for treatment. They don't pay money for the bills and treatment that you don't get. Now, on a little rear ender, something like that, I think it's reasonable for somebody to wait a couple days because they think, hey, it's no big deal. About 10 years ago, I was involved in a rear end accident. And I thought initially at the time with my adrenaline pumping, out there exchanging information, I didn't think anything of it. But within a couple of days, I was sore. And, I've played contact sports before. I've known what it's like to get hit. And anybody who has played a contact sport will know you get hit, you continue to play the game. Maybe you don't feel the pain, but within 2 or 3 days after that contact, you feel the pain. That's the time to go to an emergency room or at least your family doctor. If you don't get these symptoms into your medical record, the insurance company will say, it's not in your medical record, therefore it never happened.
New Mexico residents, they often are juggling work, caregiving, and long distances between towns. So, how do those real life circumstances make it harder for people to stay ahead of these deadlines?
Absolutely. I mean, I understand. Every client that comes in here has a life, and that life that they were living before the accident is a life that they have to return to, right? They got to go to their job, they got to pick up their kids from school, they got to buy the groceries, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest impediment to getting treatment very often is their vehicle has been destroyed. Their vehicle is no longer running. So we can make a referral to a chiropractor or to a physical therapist, but if we don't get their property damage resolved very quickly, that may mean the difference between getting treatment and getting those symptoms diagnosed and documented, and not getting treatment and not getting those symptoms and treatment diagnosed. And so it's imperative that we get the property damage resolved as quickly as we can. And what I tell people is, look, if you can have somebody drive you to a doctor's appointment, if you can't get to a doctor's appointment, at least call your family doc and tell them about the symptoms that you're having. If you can't get in immediately, at least make an appointment so that down the road, if push comes to shove and we get into litigation, a client has a plausible real world explanation that any juror can relate to, which is, yeah, 2 or 3 days after the accident, I was still in a lot of pain. So I called and made an appointment with my doctor, but my doctor was full up. And so it took me about 8 days to get into my doctor. Juries understand that. But what they want to see is a plaintiff saying, "Yeah, I'm hurting, and I'm hurting within a day or two of the accident."
Well, for those Spanish speaking families, paperwork and official notices can be confusing or even intimidating. So, what kinds of issues can come up with a language barrier that's slowing things down?
I think there are many. What I would say, the first issue that we have to deal with is sort of explaining the legal process. The vast majority of our clients are Mexican nationals, and although they may have lived in the U.S. for a few years or even several years, they haven't had a reason to sort of get involved in the legal process for a variety of reasons. Maybe they haven't had an experience in it. Maybe they haven't wanted to have an experience in it, but they come to us because they had an accident, and that means they can't get to their job. Their vehicle has been destroyed. They know something bad happened to them, and they know that they might have rights, but they're not sure how to pursue them. So one of the things that we do is we explain the whole process from the beginning to the end. We tell them why it's important that they come to us early. We tell them why it's important that they get into treatment early. All the things that I have explained to you, we explain to them. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of the issues that we explain to our English speakers are very difficult to locate on the internet in Spanish. And so very often when someone comes to us, we are kind of their lifeline. They don't know where to turn. The internet is not particularly good at telling them what their options are. So we demystify that. The other thing is, particularly with Spanish speakers, they have a lot of fear of the legal process for obviously all kinds of reasons. I mean, this is a tough time in America to be an immigrant. Even if you are a documented immigrant, it's a tough time to be an immigrant. And so one of the things that we do is tell them, by God, you have rights, and we are here to protect those rights, and we will do whatever we can to put money in your pocket. And the other thing is, it is not illegal. It is not wrong for you to pursue these rights. You're not going to get in trouble with law enforcement because you came to me, Abogado Elias, and decided to take action because you were injured in an accident.
Well, some deadlines apply even when the injured person hasn't fully recovered because, sometimes even like you mentioned before, a torn meniscus, a rotator cuff can take a bit, and if you break something, that can take a while too. They may not be sure that they even have a case. So, what misunderstandings tend to create delays?
I think one of the big misunderstandings that create delays is that some clients believe they have to be totally healed before they start the process of making a claim. Particularly in cases of very bad injuries, we may file a lawsuit right out of the gate within a month that the client comes to see us, because we know that the healing process is going to be long. And if we don't start the process now, because litigation can sometimes, to get a case to resolve quickly is about a 9-month affair. To get a case resolved, longer than quickly is maybe a year to a year and a half. So there's no percentage for us or for the client in waiting to start that process. But a lot of times clients think, okay, well, we're not gonna start doing this until I'm fully recovered. No, we if by the time you have recovered, we are on the verge of settling your case, that's the best case scenario for you, for us, for everyone involved.
Well, government related claims, they, like you mentioned earlier, have especially short timelines. So, what makes these cases different from that typical crash or injury?
The biggest one is the timeline itself. I mean, a client comes to us thinking, okay, I didn't get any better. I thought I was going to get better. I was getting some treatment, and they come to us 91 days after the accident. We may be in a position to tell them, I'm sorry, we can't identify who it is that caused your accident. Therefore, we don't have necessarily a basis to file suit. Now, we will move heaven and earth to find a defendant that we can viably sue, so that we can obtain a recovery for a client. But particularly when you know that you have been injured by the negligence of a government official, for God's sakes, don't wait. Seek us out immediately. There's a lot we can do. And the truth of the matter is that these government claims very often settle. The government, for whatever reason, and I think it has largely to do with the fact that juries know that we are suing the state, and so they say, well, the state should have done better. I mean, nobody likes used car dealers, nobody likes personal injury lawyers, and nobody likes politicians. Nobody likes the government. So these cases do have a tendency to settle if we can get them off the ground the proper way, if we can observe all the statutory deadlines that we have to observe, send out a proper tort claim notice, put the government on notice that we're going to make a claim. These cases have a tendency to settle, but if you don't follow those deadlines, then you kind of shot yourself in the foot.
Well, for those listeners who aren't dealing with an injury right now, what helps them stay aware of the fact that these deadlines do exist long before something unexpected happens?
This podcast, there's information obviously on the internet, but what I would tell anybody is the minute you are involved in an accident, I'm not saying, look, call us before you call the ambulance. I'm not saying call us before you call 911. There is that cliche in this business, that we are there before the ambulance gets there. It's not true. But when you're at home, you've gotten to an ambulance, you've been to the emergency room, you've gotten discharged, you've taken a day to reevaluate the situation. When you're sitting at home trying to figure out what you should do, call a lawyer, because it is in our interest to help you. The only way I get paid is if someone who has an injury calls me and says, I'd like to represent you, or asks me, what are my rights? How do I do this? So get the information. We lawyers do spend a lot of time telling people what their rights are. Sometimes I tell people you don't really have a case. And a lot of times people are okay with that because they at least want to know, have I given away the Willy Wonka golden ticket or not? So you get involved in an accident, call an attorney, make an appointment. The vast majority of us are not going to charge you for a consultation. We're not going to belittle you or make fun of you because you don't know what your rights are. I mean, when a client comes to see me and that client is that client hangs sheetrock for a living, or that client works in a body shop, I don't know how to do their job. I rely upon them to do those jobs. When you're involved in an accident, people should rely upon someone like me to do my job.
Wow, this has been so informative, David. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Justice in Two Languages. To learn more about attorney David Elias Idinopulos and his team at Elias Law, visit abogadoelias.com or call, well, wait a minute, David, what's your phone number?
It's a good one. 505-888-8888. Muchos ochos.
I love it. Thank you. You'll find resources in English and Spanish to help you understand your rights and feel supported after an unexpected injury. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who might need it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.